Even as recently as the Battle of Bakhmut, Ukrainian soldiers are hunkered down, waiting for the attrition of their enemies to blunt any further offensives that may occur later down the line.
All right, y'all, welcome back to Come to Arms channel. Okay, today we're checking out something from the awesome YouTube channel, The Armchair Historian. And this one is titled Ukraine's Modern Military. So I haven't seen a whole lot about the Ukraine war coming from this channel yet, but I'm pretty excited about this one. I imagine it's going to kind of wrap up a lot of what we've seen so far with the war in Ukraine and kind of talk from the perspective of Ukraine's military and also kind of how they're adapting, or also just like the general organization. But with the Armchair Historian, it's just a lot kind of cooler to watch it, and it's a little bit easier to kind of take it all in because they have like all these really solid animations and facts to go along with everything. So I'm pretty excited about this one.
When the Russian army invaded Ukraine in late February of 2022,
his weapon was on safe.
That the young nation's days were numbered.
Oh, there you
Yet
go.
over a year later, the Ukrainian military still seems far from defeated, and
Hell
the
yeah,
outcome
dude.
of the conflict still hangs in the balance. I'm Griffin Johnson, the Armchair Historian, and today
Dude, I'm
we're
hyped.
taking a closer look at the making of the modern Ukrainian military, the fighting force that has surprised both friend and foe alike.
Oh yeah. Yeah, they
The
got real
Soviet
surprised.
Union buckled under its own weight in 1991, Ukraine emerged as one of several newly independent nations from Eastern Europe. With collapse came inheritance, as Kyiv suddenly found itself in possession of a large chunk of the former Soviet military.
Okay.
This force included
Nice
various
consolation
armies,
prize.
approximately 6,500 tanks, over 7,000
Damn.
armored vehicles, a significant air force of around 1,500
Holy
combat
cow,
aircraft,
that's way more
and
than
a
I
naval
thought.
presence in the form of over 95 vessels of all sizes.
Jeez.
With 780,000 personnel, the armed forces of Ukraine were among the largest militaries on the continent. However, sustaining a fighting force of that size would prove highly costly and impractical at a time where a major European conflict seemed out of the question. As such, the Ukrainian government opted to significantly reduce the size of its military. Over 100,000 soldiers were discharged in the wake of budget cuts.
Damn, no kidding. They voluntarily... I did know that. Yeah, I did know that. That is really cool, though. Yeah, honestly, with like maintenance and stuff, a lot of people don't consider it. And again, me coming from like a combat arms background, I have a really good appreciation for logistics and maintenance in general, because when you have stuff that doesn't work and you're trying to rely on it, or you like try and plan it in with your mission and then it just doesn't work, it's a huge pain in the butt and it just causes way more headache. So having that maintenance lockdown, having the logistics lockdown is very helpful. So the combat arms guys aren't having to just like adjust on the fly. And also so they can have some freaking supports. I mean, walking all over the place is a pain in the butt. And also not having any sort of air support or artillery support because something was broken. So although it is costly, it's definitely worth it.
Part of the funds freed up from these reforms were instead diverted to the development of a national arms industry. Making a profit off of weapons of war was deemed more lucrative than sustaining an unnecessarily large fighting force. Competitively priced Ukrainian-manufactured tanks, APCs, and aircraft soon made their way onto the international market. By 2003, the military reforms were officially completed. The size of the armed forces had shrunk to about 295,000 personnel. In 2010, this number would further be reduced to around 200,000, and would subsequently drop as low as 130,000 when conscription was ended in October.
That's like less than the freaking Marine Corps, just the U.S. Marine Corps. The Marine Corps, I mean, I thought was pretty small, especially now that I moved into the Army. The Marine Corps was pretty small, but damn, okay. Over the course, what, 2003, it was at like 200 and something thousand? Damn, that's a lot.
Of 2013. On the geopolitical front, the new government in Kyiv was among the first of former Soviet bloc nations to begin fostering closer relations with the NATO military alliance. In 1995, NATO aided Ukraine during the Kharkiv drinking water disaster, and 2 years later, the NATO-Ukraine Commission was established. By 2004, relations had progressed to the point that Kyiv approved policies aimed toward deepening its ties with NATO through political and economic reforms, establishing a commission for cooperation with the alliance, and opening the door to joint military exercises.
Oh, hell yeah. There you
President
go.
Viktor Yushchenko, who led the country from 2005 to 2010, became the face of pro-Western alignment and made it his official policy to push Ukraine toward total independence from Russia, while actively seeking to have his country join NATO. During the
So 2010, I don't know how long it generally takes countries to kind of adapt the idea that they're going to eventually apply for NATO membership. I mean, of course, when we've seen with Sweden and Finland, they did it pretty quick. And I mean, Finland got approved pretty quick. Sweden took a little bit longer, but that's starting to roll a little bit more as we're seeing it. I mean, it's understandable they wouldn't want to go back to being, reliant on anything that's, Russian, because they kind of had a history with that already, and it didn't really work out too well. So trying to go more towards NATO, especially when NATO is being willing to support like the water crisis and kind of support in ways like that, kind of shows that it's probably going to be a little more favorable in the long run anyway to kind of move in that direction.
2008 Bucharest summit, NATO declared Ukraine's permission for NATO membership, welcoming them to join whenever they wanted, so long as they met the criteria for accession outlined in Article 10 of the North Atlantic Treaty. Given Ukraine's tender position, the requirements were considerable. Not only would Ukraine have to secure political and public support for NATO, they would also have to commit national resources to defense spending, regional cooperation, and arms compatibility with other NATO members. This latter requirement would be especially difficult, given that the majority of Ukraine's military stockpile was Soviet surplus. While Yushchenko pushed on, the government remained traditionally divided on the issue of joining NATO. Due to its economic dependence with Russia, militarily, Kyiv maintained close relations with Russia until the fateful events of 2014. After Russian-backed separatist forces in the Donbass region rose up in rebellion and Russian troops moved to annex the Crimean Peninsula, the Ukrainian military began a period of expansion that has continued up to the present day.
Yeah, I remember that. That was a pretty weird time. I think at that point I had only been in the military for a couple of years, but again, like especially being in like the infantry role, everybody was kind of like, getting a little bit more amped up or paying more attention to it because they're like, yeah, this is kind of ramping up. I mean, we saw that the Russians kept buzzing our jets and our drones and whatnot around the Black Sea. So there was a lot more focus on like our Black Sea rotational force, having people in like Romania, Bulgaria, around the area to kind of monitor and deter some of that aggression. And although it kind of peaked, to what we kind of saw in 2014, I still don't think a lot of people expected it to look like what it did, starting in February of last year.
Although the fighting up to 2022 was contained to the two separatist regions and officially only involved Ukrainian and separatist forces, Moscow's influence in the area was overt, and the government in Kyiv continued to fear an eventual full-scale Russian invasion. Investments into the depleted armed forces grew exponentially, and by July 2022, close to half a year after the Russian invasion, then Ukrainian Defense Minister Alexander Resnikov stated that the armed forces now number over 700,000 personnel, amounting to 2 armored and 13 mechanized brigades, 2 mountain brigades, 7 rocket and artillery brigades, as well as 225 aircraft. To sustain and further develop this fighting force, Ukraine's defense budget has skyrocketed to $8.3 billion in 2022, a number which is projected to increase even further this year. The spectacular increase in defense spending has resulted in a similarly impressive influx of new weaponry and equipment of all types. However, with fighting in the country ongoing, it is difficult to accurately determine the quantities of operational equipment in use. Equipment and vehicle types that have made their way to the front are in constant flux due to the haphazard arrival of armament deliveries from pro-Western and NATO.
Yeah, okay, so understandable, like it's kind of hard to kind of track all that stuff. I do wonder how, so obviously they're going to be increasing their budget. With a country that's at war, especially a country that's being invaded, of course you're going to see more attention kind of being focused to that. I do wonder how their GDP is getting hit with this invasion as well. And previously how we saw where they were building a lot of military stuff to end up selling it because they thought it was lucrative. Now that, yeah, I imagine they're going to be building a lot of that stuff to kind of keep it in-house and use it, of course, to, you know, fuel their army, give their guys some more supplies. So I wonder how it's kind of affecting their GDP and see how sustainable that is. But it is nice that a lot of countries are just, you know, donating a lot of this gear as well.
Countries, ranging from a wide variety of small arms to several artillery systems and even tanks. Before we continue, I'd like to thank the sponsor of today's video, Raycon. When I'm not using my Raycon earbuds...
Why was there a hind? Or was that a hind? I don't know. It looks like a hind. I don't know if that's the correct terminology for that specific model, but okay. Raycon and hinds. I didn't expect to see that today, but... Okay, interesting. Very interesting crossover. All right, here we go.
On purchase.
All right.
Before the large-scale arrival of Western equipment, the standard gear of the Ukrainian army mostly consisted of a selection of weapons from its own arms industry. Besides its stockpile of AK-type assault rifles and light machine guns from the Soviet era, the Ukrainian army has relied on the TAR-21 or Fort 221 bullpup assault rifle as its service weapon of choice. Although initially only utilized by special forces and the Ukrainian security service, the rifle has since made its way to regular divisions as well. To bolster its long-range capabilities, Ukrainian infantry have relied on the VPR 308 sniper rifle, which, with its light frame and increased effective range, has been an upgrade from the older and much more cumbersome Soviet SVD rifle. In terms of explosive firepower, Ukrainian soldiers are equipped with the homemade UAG-40 automatic grenade launcher.
That thing looks cool. It looks fun to shoot.
Its high level of portability and ease of use make it a desirable weapon in both open ground and urban settings. Finally, for its anti-tank capabilities, Ukrainian ground units use the Stugna P anti-tank missile system. Fired from T-55 tanks and the...
So I wonder what their primary shoulder-fired anti-tank weapon was, and I don't think this comes in any shoulder-fired variant that I've ever seen. I imagine, again, with just like the Soviet gear that they did have, there's probably RPGs in there. Not necessarily the same capability as, you know, the Stugna, but still, like, it is nice to have those in the squad. I imagine it's probably just RPGs, though.
Fired from T-55 tanks and the MT-12 field gun, the Stugna's laser-guided system can hit moving targets with a range of up to 5 kilometers and penetrate armor with up to 800 millimeters in thickness. The Ukrainian military command has also invested much into the army's artillery capabilities, including artillery locating radars, battery command, and control systems.
Real quick, those radars are clutch because, I mean, you got to think when there's artillery firing on your guys and you want to get rid of that artillery, having a radar that can determine that point of origin very quickly is great for counter battery fire because you can knock out their artillery and, you know, potentially have that artillery superiority, if you will, because now their guys are feeling the pressure and your guys are good.
To enhance the efficiency of its artillery corps, Ukrainian command has put special emphasis on the training and formation of new drone forward observation and fire coordination units.
Hell yeah.
The Turkish-made Bayraktar TB2 armed drone has become such a crucial component of the Ukrainian armed forces that there are plans underway to establish local production of these drones in the vicinity of Kyiv. In addition to Ukrainian-made weaponry, the armed forces continue to be amply supplied with both American-made Javelin anti-tank missile systems as well as British-made NLAW rocket launchers. The American Security Assistance Program alone has amounted to $2.7 billion worth of weapons and equipment between 2014 and early 2022. The Ukrainian Air Force, for its part, has given priority to upgrading the nation's large existing air defense network with its wide array of Soviet-era air defense systems. The Navy, similarly, has primarily focused on purchasing small-sized vessels in accordance with its aptly named Mosquito Doctrine, which envisions rapid hit-and-run attacks against the larger Russian Navy with agile patrol boats equipped with guided missiles as well as unmanned kamikaze drones.
I kind of like that Mosquito Doctrine, just like swarming them, like little hit-and-run attacks, and then the drones, again, I mean, that is kind of similar to the drone swarming concept that was popular around early 2016, 2017. And I do like how they're talking about air and missile defense as well, because that's great. Of course, it's got a huge military application as far as protecting the forces and equipment. However, it's great for the general populace as well, having these air and missile defense systems, especially now that Ukraine has the Patriot missile system. I mean, that thing's been putting in work. I think it even defended against a hypersonic missile at one point, which I think was unheard of, until like modern times, until this war. And if I can find it, I'll put an article just so I'm not like talking out of my butt too much. But yeah, this is great because now, just like the Iron Dome in Israel, these systems are able to kind of put the general populace a little bit more at ease, because now they're not having to worry as much about rocket or missile attacks if they have these defensive systems.
The nature of service and conscription within the military has also undergone many changes. Under the Soviet Union, all able-bodied males were required to serve 2 years in the armed forces or 3 years in the Navy. Mandatory conscription was stopped briefly in October 2013, with the armed forces being made up of 40% conscripts and 60% contract soldiers. However, less than 1 year later, acting President Alexander Turchinov reinstated conscription in May of 2014, with a modified target of males between the ages of 20 to 27 over the previous 18 to 25. In 2017, over 14,000 individuals enlisted in the Ukrainian armed forces for contract service. However, draft evasion had been an ongoing issue since its reimplementation in 2014. By 2022, President Volodymyr Zelensky announced the end of conscription by January 1st, 2024, along with an increase in professional servicemen and improved compensation and housing.
Okay, so that's interesting. I wonder what the benefits kind of difference or disparity is from the conscripts to the professional, or I think they're saying contracted soldiers. I mean, of course, I would imagine if you're volunteering, you probably get certain, benefits that the conscription soldiers wouldn't necessarily get. But I imagine if you're in combat, whether you be, a conscript or a volunteer, the benefits would be pretty much the same, and the pay would probably be pretty much the same. But I'm not really too sure. I guess if you're contracted, you might get more of like a bonus on the front end, just to kind of be like, hey, appreciate you, contracting or, offering this much time to serve. But I do kind of wonder what the difference is. If you guys have any info, especially y'all over in Ukraine, on what the difference is, especially in like an active combat zone or in war, what the difference is between like a conscription pay or, contracted soldier. If you guys know that, let me know, because that's pretty interesting to think about now.
Improved compensation and housing. However, the Russian invasion disrupted these plans, and popular mobilization occurred, including the recruitment of prisoners with combat experience. After the start of the war in the Donbass region in 2014, Kyiv set to identify key weak points within its armed forces. The review found that rampant corruption, poor logistics and medical care, inefficient command, and overall inability to combat cyber attacks all contributed to poor combat performance on the battlefield.
It's kind of hard to freaking counter Russian cyber. They're usually pretty freaking solid, and especially if, they're actively in war with you, they're probably going to put a lot of efforts against that.
To remedy these shortcomings, then President Petro Poroshenko directed sweeping reforms in all these areas. Amongst these changes was a vital initiative to radically change the culture surrounding lower-level command structure, which had previously insisted that lower-level leaders wait for approval from higher headquarters for every desired move.
Oh, that's
now
odd.
The idea was that leaders on the ground would be encouraged to take initiative wherever applicable.
Yeah, we have something in the Army that we call mission command, which is basically like, dude, I'm going to tell you what I want to have happen, and I'm just going to trust that you're going to get it done. Yeah, you have good NCOs, good officers. You should be able to get this done. You have enough resources. If you don't, let me know. But here's your mission. Get it done. If be as flexible as you need to, and just get it done. So I'm not trying to micromanage all of this, because it's impossible to, especially as a battalion commander, to micromanage all the leadership or all the officers, even down to the platoon level. You can't hold their hand with everything. You're going to be overwhelmed, and it's just not good for them either.
Due to fears of a looming Russian invasion, Poroshenko's reforms were given absolute priority and set to be completed in just 4 years. By the time the Russian forces moved into Ukraine's territory in 2022, the Ukrainian armed forces would prove a far more formidable foe than the one Russian troops had met 8 years prior. On February 24, 2022, Ukraine's worst fears were confirmed as Russian forces crossed into Ukraine across multiple fronts targeting key centers such as Odessa, Kharkiv, and Kyiv.
Nice.
However, Russia's plan for a swift victory had been thwarted, as the newly reformed Ukrainian armed forces were able to withstand the initial invasion despite their tenuous position. The defense of Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, was vital in denying Russia one of their most important strategic objectives.
So real quick, I saw that it said ban on leave. So yeah, I kind of wonder how that's working as well. If that's still in effect, if they're still banning people on leave, or maybe I guess if you serve a certain amount of time on the front lines or in combat, you are kind of awarded some leave. Hopefully, it works out like that. But I'm also kind of curious about that. It makes sense. We need more people to be here and present to put towards this conflict. But I imagine, you get something if you've been in combat.
Capital, Kyiv, was vital in denying Russia one of their most important strategic objectives, while the displays of tenacity, such as that in Mariupol, showed the extremes to which many Ukrainian volunteers were willing to go. Since 2014, a key component of the Ukrainian defensive strategy has been the construction of trench lines, which have helped consolidate and hold territory under their control. Since 2022, this strategy has remained, with major trench lines becoming key factors toward the static war that has since developed ever since the Russian advance began to slow down.
Those
Even
trenches
as
are
recently
gnarly.
as the Battle of Bakhmut, Ukrainian soldiers are hunkered down, waiting for the attrition of their enemies to blunt any further offensives that may occur later down the line. Within a span of just 30 years...
I gotta say, these animations are like really solid. Just the lighting and stuff in general makes it that much more like moody and believable. But yeah, I never really expected in like a modern conflict to see this much sort of trench warfare. It does make sense, of course, with Ukraine's terrain. It's not all urban. So for some of those more open areas, you want to have those trench systems to stop any advances, on foot or what have you. And even having trenches outside of an urban area, that's something that we kind of learned about a little bit, setting them up just so that you can't have people just, moving up onto the outskirts and maneuvering through the city from like the exterior. It makes sense to do it that way. But again, it is kind of gnarly to be seeing as we are, especially some of the conditions that we've been seeing in those trenches are just brutal.
Are hunkered down, waiting for the attrition of their enemies to blunt any further offensives that may occur later down the line. Within a span of just 30 years, the Ukrainian military has transformed itself from a bloated relic of its Soviet past into a modern fighting force, seemingly capable of going toe-to-toe against one of the strongest militaries
it's not seemingly.
in the world.
They're doing a great job.
Its rekindling of ties to NATO and the West has arguably contributed much to this process over the years. But unlike several other Western-backed militaries around the world, the Ukrainian armed forces have thus far surpassed all expectations and have managed to hold their own in what they believe to be a fight for their country's very existence.
Yeah, and we've seen that definitely makes a difference with like the tenacity and aggression that they're fighting with. Again, me coming from a combat arms or infantry background and knowing a lot of infantrymen, a lot of people that I know here are very, very impressed with the fighting that they're seeing. Again, like it's one thing to have years of experience, even if you haven't been in combat, to have years of experience in this job and kind of adapt this mindset as to what it means to be in the infantry or be in this combat arms role. That's one thing, but for a lot of these guys, they don't have a whole lot of military background in general or any sort of combat-oriented background. So they're having to learn a lot of these tactics very quickly, and they're doing a fantastic job. It does help to have that leadership to kind of shape that as well. But again, they kind of understand the stakes, and they're doing a great job of taking that understanding and that passion and turning it into, this lethality where they're getting this knowledge, they're getting proficient with their weapons, and they're also just being really adaptable in how they're implementing like drones and making their own munitions. Again, it's just stuff that we haven't seen before. And for modern conflict to kind of see this, it's just crazy to think about what any sort of future conflicts might see. Because this is Ukraine doing it with their resources. But other countries, if they start, having the need to kind of adapt and use whatever resources they have for weaponry or to fight this war, it's pretty interesting to see what we might see in the future. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. If there's anything that stood out that I kind of missed, it is nice to have the historical context for sure, a little bit of that. And it's understandable. And again, now I'm kind of thinking back on what it felt like back in 2014. It felt very odd. It's like, it seemed like there was an underreaction. But now that, at least, I'm here in the US, it seemed like there was an underreaction. But now it's nice to see all the support going towards Ukraine. Again, I think we all just need to kind of let Russia know that that's not going to be tolerated. And that's kind of what we've been seeing. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. Armchair Historian, again, does a fantastic job. I'll put the original video in the description so you guys can go and check out the video or the channel, because there's a lot of cool stuff on there anyway. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed. That is it for this video. I will see y'all in the next one.